Hi, thank you for tuning into the Short Stacks. I'm Lisa Quintero, Young Adult Librarian.
And I'm Nick Barron, patron and sometimes volunteer.
This is the show where we talk to you about what we've been listening to, reading, or watching. But first, we're going to talk about some
library news.
Yeah, so we've got a few different events going on in the upcoming weeks. We have our next Tinker Lab to go is going to be on Monday, September 28th. So stop by and pick up one of those kits if you are interested. They're for 3rd grade and up. Our cart kits are continuing on Wednesdays, just like they did this summer. So you can still pick those up any Wednesday. Miss Susan does different projects for each week, so be sure to check them out. We also are continuing Stories on the Lawn, which Miss Heidi does a story time out on the lawn outside of the library. We do require that you register for that, however, in order to maintain social distancing. So you can register either on our website or you can give us a call at the library at 414-847-2670. And then that will go until October 15th and is at 10 a.m. on Thursdays. And then finally, Haley is having her PM book club on Wednesday, October 7th. And so if you're interested in joining with the book club, you can check that out on our calendar and it'll tell you what book they're reading and how to participate in the book discussion. So yeah, that's about pretty much all the events that we've got going on. We did our first grown-up take and make kit this week. It was you could either make your own salsa or you could make your own pesto and grow your own basil or grow your own cilantro. So that was exciting. I don't know if there's any still around, but you can always stop by the library and check in, and we might still have one or two of those available if you are interested.
From the stacks. So we decided to do a running themed episode this time around.
Yeah, Nick and I both enjoy running. I've actually been running for about, I think, 15 years now. And I started doing it as a stress reliever thing several years ago. And I convinced Nick to do his first 5K with me, was it last year? 2 years ago?
Yeah, 2 years ago.
And we did the glow run. And I really enjoy running. And recently I went on a trip, and part of the trip was me completing my first 5K since I had an injury last year. Last year I had a talus fracture. And for those who don't know, it's a bone in your ankle, and it's a pretty rare break. And I was told that I probably wouldn't ever be able to run again or jump again after it happened. But after almost a year of physical therapy and obtaining a brace, I am now able to run again, which is pretty exciting because running is a big part of my life. It was a big part of my life before my accident, and I was pretty upset to learn that it would be something I was probably never going to be able to do again. And in fact, one of the things that the surgeon said after my accident was that I might potentially have to have my foot amputated, and so it was pretty traumatic. But
your bounce back has been miraculous. So
yeah. So anyway, September. A bunch of us from work signed up for the Riveter Run, which is a 5K, and Carolyn, actually, who's been on the show before,
a virtual 5K.
Yeah, a virtual 5K. Carolyn, who's been on the show before, organized the whole thing. She is an avid runner, as are a few of our other staff members. And so she asked if anybody else from the library would like to join. And so a few of us joined up, and we all completed our 5K separately, virtually. And then you post your results online, and you get a T-shirt. And so we took a picture of those of us who completed it in our T-shirts afterwards. And it was pretty cool. And it was very exciting because it was my first 5K in over a year, and I actually completed it. I mean, my time was terrible, but I did it. I completed it, and I thought I'd never be able to run again. So to me, that's just amazing. So in order to get kind of pumped up about running again and get into the zone for my first 5K, I took a few different audiobooks on a trip that I went on. So I went on this solo trip, and it was my first solo vacation since I was about 20 years old. So it's been about 18 years. And I went to Stockholm, Wisconsin, which is on the Wisconsin-Minnesota border. And it's actually near Peepin, Wisconsin, which I learned is the home of Laura Ingalls Wilder, which I had not known before. And since it's about a 5-hour drive, I took a few audiobooks. So one of the audiobooks that I took was this book called Born to Run by Christopher McDougall, A Hidden Tribe, Super Athletes, and the Greatest Race the World Has Never Seen. And so Born to Run is actually audiobook that both Nick and I listened to. Like, he listened to parts of it because he's been in the car with me off and on, but I listened to the majority of it because I started off on my solo trip and everything. But it's basically this book about a journalist who covers mostly extreme sports, and that's Christopher McDougall. And he had all these injuries that were happening to him when he was running, and he wanted to figure out why. And he's kind of a stubborn guy, and, his first doctor that he went to was like, well, your problem is that you're running, and, you shouldn't run because it's terrible on the body, and just stop running and ride a bicycle, which I could relate to because that's kind of what my doctor said after my surgery. And it's exactly what he said after my surgery. Yeah. And this guy was like, well, I'm not going to give up on it. And so he started looking for experts on running and started interviewing different people. And when he was interviewing these people, he learned about a people in Mexico called the Tarahumara tribe. And the Tarahumara are people who live in the Sierra Madre, and they are people who run most places, and they've been known to run from the Sierra Madre Mountains all the way up to the United States. And there was actually a woman who in the 1970s, I think it was, accidentally ended up in the southern United States, and she, spoke Tarahumara, so she didn't speak Spanish or English, and people thought she was speaking gibberish, so they put her in a mental institution, and over some years, a social worker figured out, this person is an indigenous person from Mexico, and they ended up sending her back home. But, these people, they run these super long distances, kind of like original ultramarathoners. And then he goes into people in Africa who also run very long distances in order to hunt animals and just for fun too. And then he also goes into the whole ultramarathon thing. So he interviews Scott Jurek, who is one of the leading ultramarathoners in the United States, and he interviews a bunch of other runners as well. And so when he went down to Mexico, he met this guy named Caballo Blanco. And Caballo Blanco is a expat from the United States who went down to Mexico because he met the Tarahumara when they came to do an ultra marathon here in the United States. And he went looking for this guy because he wanted to learn more about the Tarahumara, because these are people who run in sandals. They don't run in fancy running shoes. They don't run in fancy running clothes. And so he ended up going down there, meeting Caballo Blanco, and getting to know the Tarahumara and getting involved in this race between some of the greatest ultramarathoners in the country. So what did you think about the book, Nick?
The first thing that threw me off, but made it for an entertaining read, is that the book. So I didn't know what I was getting into when I got into the car. Mm-hmm. Lisa was just happened to be listening to this book. And, one chapter, he would be talking, it was like a memoir, but where it was written like novel form, where he's giving the exact quotes of what everybody said. It was written in a novel-esque style. And then the next chapter would go into this deep dive into the mechanics of the foot. Mm-hmm. And so it was this medical journalism. And then the next chapter would go into, something else. And so at first I didn't know what to make of it. But the stories of the people and that novel-esque memoir type thing that he was writing, you become attached to the people because they're all very interesting. Mm-hmm. And so then I started there was a whole chapter on Barefoot Ted. Uh-huh. And Barefoot Ted is this hippie guy that, he ends up meeting and he runs everywhere in his bare feet. And so he goes into this whole deep dive into the backstory of Barefoot Ted. And, suddenly you're starting to root for these different people, and you get, pulled in. And so it's you're learning about this idea of running without shoes. And at the same time, the medical stuff is thrown in there in its own separate chapters, but it's all being tied together with these very personal stories.
Yeah, I liked that about it. So yeah, it's part memoir because it's the story about him going down and joining this race and all the characters that he meets along the way and ends up racing with. But then yeah, like you said, it goes into a lot of the medical history and how humans evolved to basically the thesis of the book is that humans evolved to be runners, and goes into various details as to why that is, from us having a nuchal ligament, which I guess most mammals don't have. Horses and dogs have it, and humans have it, and other mammals don't have it. and that allows our head to be stabilized when we are moving fast. He also talks about how a lot of animals that stand upright that run have tails, but humans don't, and talks about the way that our feet are laid out and how basically our whole body was engineered for long distance running, not necessarily for speedy running, but for long distance running and endurance. And he talks about, how women have more endurance and women have been known to complete more ultramarathons than men. And it's just really interesting. And like you said, he also goes into the history of great runners. So he talks about, how the gym shoe, the running shoe, has changed the way that Americans run, and how in the 1940s and the 1960s and the 1970s, all these runners ran these marathons at these very quick paces and short times, and it was because of what they were wearing on their feet and because their feet were much stronger than our feet are now, and how the modern running shoe has made our feet weaker, and therefore that's what's leading to problems like plantar fasciitis and all these other things that runners run into in terms of their injuries.
And to give that context, it's like, think about the pair of Chuck Taylors that you may have worn at some point in your life. Like the shoes that were made pre-Nike, pre-1970s, were all very flat and didn't have arch support or all the things that we think of as being these masterful innovations of modern shoes. And they break that down because you don't really think about that, because most of us wearing something like Chuck Taylor's is a choice, whereas back then that's just how shoes were made.
Yeah, and it's interesting because going through physical therapy myself, it's like when I wear running shoes, I notice that my Achilles tendon becomes much tighter because my heel is further up off of the ground, whereas when I wear shoes that are like Chuck's, I have like my Airwalks, which are similar. I feel more of a stretch in my Achilles because they're flat on the ground, and so they're not pushing my heel up. But yeah, it's really interesting because he breaks it all down. And if you are interested in running and in human evolution or just in anthropology, you should check this book out.
Yeah, it is a very interesting book. And especially because it ends on their personal stories. And I'll be honest, it made me a little emo.
Yep, definitely made me emo as well, especially the parts about Scott Jurek and how he's one of the best runners, and at every race that he ever has competed in, they talk about how he always waits at the end of at the finish line with a sleeping bag wrapped around himself so he can keep cheering on every single runner that comes through, and I think that's just great because it talks a little bit about how in his younger years he was not a very good runner, but now he's this champion of ultramarathons.
Yep. So next was the
documentary. Yep, we watched a documentary called Run for Your Life, the Fred Lebow Story, which was made in 2008. And it's actually a film about the guy who started the New York City Marathon. And so it was interesting because I never really thought, marathons, pretty much most of them have existed my whole life in terms of the big cities. So I never really thought about the origins of marathons, but this is about, how this started, and it started in the 60s, and they talk about how it started out as this running club that would run around the Bronx, and it was these guys that were just they'd meet at Yankee Stadium, and they'd meet in the men's locker room, so women weren't allowed to join in, and they would run around the Bronx, and they'd run around in these white t-shirts and white shorts, so it looked like they were running around their underwear, and everybody just thought they were kind of these freaks, why are these people running around the neighborhood? And so Fred Lebow, he emigrated here from, do you remember where he came from? Was it Romania?
I don't remember.
Yeah, so somewhere in Eastern Europe, and his family was Jewish. His original last name was Leibowitz, but he changed his name when he came to the United States, and he had been sent off to live in Israel for a while, and then from Israel he and his brother came to live in the United States. But yeah, so he was a guy who worked in the garment industry, and he joined this running club, and running was kind of what he did after work every day. It was the thing that he enjoyed, and even though he was, the slowest guy in the club, he still showed up all the time. And so he had this idea and kind of came and shook things up, and a lot of the guys in the Bronx club were kind of like, who is this guy and why is he shaking things up? he had this idea to start a marathon because, Boston had its marathon at the time, and he was like, well, why can't we have one in New York City? And so they had their first one in Central Park, but, they break down how terrible it was because Central Park is, full of pedestrians and people on bikes and people with baby carriages, and it's not a flat surface area. It's like a lot of hills and a lot of stairs. And
yeah, they don't specifically mention this, but Olmsted, Frederick Law Olmsted, designed Central Park, and his big thing when he designed Park was using the natural features of the space to frame the park. And so, whereas nowadays, a lot of times when people come in and design a park, they just
raise everything.
They raise everything, and they build in ponds and what have you. And he used all of the natural features, but that also makes for a very hilly, it's we've been to Central Park. It's shapely.
Yes, it's very shapely. So that was where they held the first 2 New York City marathons. And he, was kind of upset by how few people turned out for them. And so he kept pushing and being like, well, we can make this bigger and better. And so in 1976, for the bicentennial, he decided that they were going to throw like a bigger marathon. And he wanted it to enter all 5 boroughs of New York City. And so he actually went to like the city council and all that and got permission to do this. And everybody was kind of like, this guy's crazy, because in the 70s, New York was kind of, not a great place to be. There was a lot of arson going on, a lot of crime, a lot of different things that were, making New York was like not doing well financially. It was not the place that, people want to be, not the New York of today.
Yes.
And so he had this idea of joining all the boroughs. And so it would go through the Bronx and Queens and Staten Island, and it would go across one of the bridges. And everybody thought he was crazy because this would mean that he would have to like close down roads and this and that, and it had never been done before. And they're like, how are you going to close down all these roads in New York City? Like, this is madness. But he managed to be like, oh, it's just a one-off thing. It's just for the bicentennial. And so he promoted it by asking a couple of Olympians, 2 guys that had competed in the Olympic marathon, and one of them who had done poorly in the Olympic marathon. He invited them to participate in the marathon to kind of, give him another chance to see if he could beat his time and do better this time. And so those guys agreed to come. And then he also, around the same time, did like a mini marathon for women. And up until that time, there hadn't been any long distance runs for women. And so the mini marathon for women was a 6-mile run. And that was still in Central Park when they were doing stuff in Central Park. And that got a lot of women out to run. And all of a sudden, kind of started this surge in women running.
And one of the things that was interesting about this is that so he was really savvy at ways to get like sponsorships and things like that. And Legs, right?
It wasn't Legs. It was some shaving cream company, women's shaving cream.
Yeah, and they came to him, and they had pitched the idea of well, what about a run that was a marathon for women? And so they went back and forth, and then they came up with the idea of the mini run, because mini skirts were a thing.
And he was involved with the garment industry. Yeah.
And so it all went full circle, and this resulted in him then putting a lot of effort and time into, hey, there's interest in this, so he reached out and found other sponsorships as time went on.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting because they talked about how corporate sponsorship for races, for athletic stuff, wasn't really a thing at this point in time, and this was a new idea, and and he got all these different corporations, banks to sponsor runners or sponsor runs, and he ended up getting all this stuff kind of built up over the years, and then in 1976 he hosted the first marathon that went around the city, and it brought out over 2,000 runners and all these people from the neighborhoods. And it was interesting because, he went around to different neighborhoods kind of to set up the course and talk to people. And at one of the neighborhoods, I can't remember which neighborhood it was, but, there was like a bunch of like gang member guys who are just like, well, we don't want the cops in our neighborhood. Like that's not how we do things here. And he's like, all right, well, if you don't want the police in your neighborhood, like, how about you guys, are security for this part of the race? And they're like, okay. And so he gave them T-shirts. And it talked about how, like, each neighborhood kind of came together. They, they cleaned up the area where where the race was going to be going through. They, like, it became a big party and a big celebration. And up until that point, it talked about how a lot of the boroughs had kind of been pitted against each other. But this made it, like, a big celebration of New York City and of all the boroughs and of all the people. And it was a positive thing in a city that was having a lot of problems and had a big negative reputation at the time. And so, yeah, it was really interesting. And he went on after that to keep doing the marathon every year in New York City because, it was so popular. And it talked about how after the first year, like, it just exponentially grew. And after the first year, there were women who participated and women who won the marathon. And he brought, this woman from Norway over, and she won it like 9 times. And then on top of doing the marathon, he also started doing a lot of the runs, kind of like runs that Nick and I have done. So, like, they talked about how he was a great showman and he was really good at entertaining people. And so he would do these runs, like, costumed runs, or he would do, he did a New Year's Eve run where the water stations had champagne instead of water, and there were fireworks, and you started running at midnight. And so, all these things, like, nowadays, like, Nick and I have gone to, like, the Hot Cider Hustle, we've gone to the Glow Run, and we've participated in a bunch of different, runs that are kind of like, they all have their little gimmick or little thing that you do. And the Glow Run is one where you run in the dark and you're wearing, like, glow sticks. And the Hot Cider Hustle is one when it's, like, October and it's cold out and you end up with getting hot cider at the end. But, they all have these themes to them, and they bring people out, and they just make running fun. And he was never, like, a great runner himself, but he found these ways to make running fun and ended up dedicating his life to it. Like, he ended up putting all of his money that he had from working in the garment industry into making all these runs and forming the running club, like, and establishing it and getting, like, helping buy a brownstone so that it would be the home of the running club.
That one of the things that I love is stories about really passionate people that, kind of, like, throw themselves fully into something. And, once he started putting together these marathons and these additional side runs, he segued himself away from the garment industry and just dedicated himself completely to organizing these runs. And they talk about, him, bringing people in and having them, they do, like, a running club newsletter, and the people coming in to, like, stuff envelopes and what have you, and, him hiring his first person and all that. And I love those kinds of stories where somebody just, it's like they get the tunnel vision. And one of the things that Lisa and I talked about was him having this lifestyle where they talked to his brother, and his brother came to visit him, and he was about to go for his 20-mile run, and he's like, hey, it's good to see you, I'll see you in a bit, and takes off on his run.
Yeah, like, running was more important to him than other things. It reminded me of the Free Solo documentary that we watched, because, like, he was as committed, I feel like, to running as the guy from the Free Solo documentary was committed to climbing. It's like, and the people in his life either understood that or they didn't understand that. And, and the people who were his good friends were people who kind of understood that about him, it seemed like. So. Yep.
If you do decide to watch this documentary, when it starts, I've got to make note of this. When the movie starts, you're watching it and you're like, I thought to myself, did Lisa bring home a documentary from the 70s? I was really kind of, like, thrown off because the movie starts and everything, like, all of the art and graphics and everything, I would compare it now in retrospect to a Quentin Tarantino film, in the sense that it pulls all of these, like, 70s elements, like the iconography and the logos and everything, and you're like, am I watching this thing from the 70s? But actually it was from 2008. Mm-hmm. And once they start interviewing people, you get the sense that, this is actually a documentary from now. So it was just a side note that really threw me off at the beginning, but actually, it's a
deliberate choice. Yeah, it seemed like it was probably for continuity, because they have a lot of clips from the 60s and a lot of clips,
from the 70s.
So, yeah.
So, tell us about the Jason Reynolds book.
Oh, yeah. So the last book that I took with me on my road trip, my trip to Stockholm, was Ghost by Jason Reynolds, which is a book for middle schoolers, like 4th, 5th grade. It's about a middle schooler, he's in 7th grade, named Castle Crenshaw. and he goes by Ghost. And Castle Crenshaw is somebody who he and his mom had to run away from his dad when his dad drunkenly tried to shoot them and kill them. And so he and his mom ran away, and he is proud of his ability to run really fast. But Ghost just wants to like join a basketball team and like be a cool kid because he's in 7th grade and he thinks basketball is like the best thing ever. And he, after school, doesn't have much going on, so he goes and watches people. Sometimes he goes and sits at the bus stop and watches people, or he goes and sits at the, across from the store and watches people. And one of the places that he likes to go watch people is at the track. And so he goes to the track, and he happens to come on a day when a track team is having their first meet. And they're kind of like testing everybody out to see what kind of runner they are, whether they're a distance runner, they're a sprinter, or what the deal is. And, there's this guy who he sees sprinting, and the guy, like, is wearing fancy shoes, and the guy, you can tell, thinks he's, like, hot stuff, and wearing a fancy outfit and everything. And so Ghost gets it in his head that he's going to beat this kid, and show him, because the kid just seems kind of like his bully who he hates at school, and he's, like, kind of in this mindset of, like, I'm going to beat this guy. And so the guy's lined up on the track to run, and Ghost goes into the field next to him and lines up. And the coach is like, what are you doing? And get out of here. And Ghost is like, I'm just going to run this thing, and then I'm leaving, I'll leave. And so the coach is like, fine, whatever. And they run, and Ghost ends up beating this kid. And this kid's like one of the fastest kids on the team. And so after they run, Ghost like picks up his backpack and starts walking away from the field. And the coach chases him down and is like, what's your name? Like, who do you run for? This and that. And he's like, I don't run for anybody. Like, I run for myself. And like, what are you talking about? Who do I run for? And he's like, do you want to be on the track team? He's like, not really. I want to be on the basketball team. And he's like, how's that going for you? And like, he's like, I'm practicing. And so the coach ends up asking him if he'd like to join the team. And he's like, yeah, my mom probably wouldn't let me join. But the coach ends up convincing his mom, because his mom's like, that way I'll at least know where he is after school, and it's something positive. And so he joins the track team, and it's a coming of age story, because along the way he learns about his teammates, because, at first he thinks that his teammates are all better off than him, and that their lives are all, easier, and he has these prejudices about the people around him, and then he, gets to know people, and the coach actually takes all of the teammates out for a meal together, like all the newbies, all the first years, and they all have to like share one deep dark secret about themselves. So he shares the secret about his dad trying to kill him and his mom, and there's a girl on the team named Patina, and she shares that she's adopted and that she runs because her mom, she knows her biological mom, and her biological mom gave her up for adoption because her biological mom has diabetes and had to have her legs amputated, so she wasn't able to take care of Patina and her sister. And so it goes into all the different stories of all the different newbies. And Jason Reynolds actually wrote a book about each of the characters from the series. So it's a series. So like the second book in the series is about Patina, and then the next one after that is about Lou, I believe, which is the kid who races against Ghost. And it's just a really sweet story. He has to deal with his bully. He has to deal with growing up. He has to deal with, kind of his issues around poverty and around how to overcome some of the things that he thinks are wrong with him because of his situation. And it's a quick listen. That was the first one I listened to, because it was only about 2 hours long, and the narrator is pretty great. So you should check that one out if you are into running, or if you have a middle schooler who is looking for a good read and enjoys stuff about sports, or just about, coming of age realistic fiction. And like I said, it's a series, so it's great start to a new series if you're interested.
Yeah. So when we discussed that we were going to do a running themed episode, I always have to do like a music tie-in
because you live around music. Yeah, no, it's true.
And so the morning we actually had to record this podcast twice, but the morning that we were going to do it the first time, like I woke up that morning and I had the song "Take It on the Run" by REO Speedwagon stuck in my head. And it got me thinking, and I was like, I ran so far away, from Flock of Seagulls, and all of these different songs that had running.
Tiffany running just as fast as we can.
All these songs that have references to running usually are somebody running to somebody or running away from somebody in a romantic sense. Or Tramps Like Us, Baby I Was Born to Run.
Yeah, Bruce Springsteen.
That sort of thing. But they aren't actually about running
itself. Yeah.
Yeah, but when we were watching the movie about the guy about Fred Lebow and the start of the marathon, I had thought about a song by the band Iron Maiden, "The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner." And so, out of curiosity, I did a Google search on the lyrics because even though I had that record when I was in middle school, I don't have it anymore. And so I looked up the lyrics and I was like, Iron Maiden, you've done it again. The song is actually about running marathons, and so I was and about the loneliness one feels when they are running a marathon.
I wonder if any of the guys in Iron Maiden have ever actually run a marathon.
Yeah, that's a fair question. But
why are they writing about running marathons? I mean, you would figure one of them has to if they're writing about it, but who knows?
Interesting thing, Bruce Dickinson, the singer, he has a pilot's license and he flies them everywhere they go on tour.
Okay, so maybe one of them probably has done it at some point. Maybe one of them's an ultra marathoner. Who knows? I'll have to look into this.
Yeah, exactly. But if anybody can think of any songs that are actually about running, the act of running, I would love to hear it in the comments. And the one that doesn't count is "Going the Distance" by Cake, because that's about success. It's not about actually running. So.
Yeah, so you can either put it in the comments or you can email us at shortstacks@gmail.com. We always love hearing from our listeners. As always, you can find us on Spotify, Podbean, or iTunes. We hope you have enjoyed the show. Thank you for listening.
And be well.
The Shore Stacks is produced by Lisa Quintero and Nick Barron for the Shore Public Library. The music on the show is by Kevin MacLeod and is entitled Ice Flow. You can find it at incompetech.com.